for his sake and for football in Australia's sake that he does, because I'm going to throw to you, Joe. What does obviously Australia football is in a hole at the minute. Where what does it need to do to fix itself? Where does it need to improve?
I've always been a big believer in you've got to invest in the game, right? Like you can, I don't know. And Jules, again, can probably talk to this more than me because he's been around it a lot longer. But even when I was a kid, the politics at even grassroots level is just ridiculous. It's not necessarily the hardest working players that'll get through or the most talented. It's the ones that have got unfortunately the right connections or the right people in place to take them to places that they want to get to. Not all the time, but it's there and it's definitely there at a junior level. I know I felt it, but for me, when you even past grassroots, when you look at well, what can we do now to fix where we're at? We're going to sudden death again for a World Cup playoff in arguably a pretty easy group when you think about it. Probably should have got through along with Japan very, very easily without having to go to sudden death. For me, we haven't invested in the national team since I'd say Postecoglou, but probably before that, getting Gus Hiddink on board and really taking the national team to a level that we'd never seen before. And it's plain and simple for me. Invest in the right coaching staff. Let them make the decisions. Pay good money to get someone across. This isn't a dig at Graham Arnold. He's done what he's done at domestic level, and I think he's obviously a great coach. I'm an armchair expert, right? He's a great coach, but the difference between domestic and international level, it's massive. Like the golf, but especially Australian domestic football to international football and looking at a World Cup, it's massive. And it's not just the ability to put together a game plan that's going to sustain against some of the best, nations in the world. It's about being able to pick the right players and getting them to play the right roles and executing, for these big games. And Graham Arnold just hasn't been able to do it. That's fact. If he was able to do it, we wouldn't be in the position that we're in, and Australian football wouldn't be in the position that we're in. I don't blame Graham Arnold at the same time. I blame the FFA and the decisions they've made over the years to not invest in the game. My grandfather, who was the one I spoke about before, he was always a big believer in just pay big money to whoever you need to pay big money to, get them across, and get people invested back in the game. So whether it be, I know this, it seems far-fetched now, but at the time when he was available, someone like a Mancini who was out of business, out of a coaching job after Man City and wanted the international experience. And we go after, I think it was Pim Verbeek at that stage, was it not? And it's like, what are we doing? Like, for an extra couple of mil, probably could have been. And I know I'm not talking about a couple of mil either as just chump change, but if you want to grow the game, if you want to invest in the game, you've got to spend the money at the end of the day. We're coming up against nations that this is, like Jules said before when he was talking about how it is in Spain, it's their religion, right? If you want this game to grow, you've got to invest in it monetary wise. And we just don't do it. We don't do it at the top level. We don't do it in the top flight. And it's a shame because there are some pretty talented footballers that come out of this country. We're a small country and it's not our number one sport by any means. It could be, but we just don't invest in it correctly. We don't invest in it enough, and it's a shame. Hopefully, one day that changes. Hopefully, like you guys were talking about with Ange, right? If something like that happens and it changes perspective on Australian football, maybe the FFA wakes up a bit and goes, "All right, now's the time to pull the trigger and invest and really take that next step." But until they're ready to invest, we're going nowhere, and we're going nowhere fast. And you can see it in the A League and the quality that's coming out of the A League. It's probably as bad as it's ever got, to be fair.
Yeah.
It's
I
think it's interesting.
Yeah, Jules, your thoughts?
I think it's interesting in terms of obviously since the golden era, in terms of the quality of players that we were able to actually produce. You have a look at the golden era, and a lot of those kinds of players came through the ranks of ethnic clubs at the end of the day. In terms of those kinds of players, that in terms of that caliber, it's not happening. I feel like as if we need to sort of rethink our perspective on those kinds of clubs. I've been involved obviously in terms of on a state level in terms of playing with those kinds of clubs, and I can tell you those kinds of people, and obviously they're from European, they're from a culture, a football culture, in terms of the way they think. And we need to tap into that, I feel. I'm not talking about in terms of the ultras and in terms of them being, in terms of bad sort of publicity on those kind of people. Because for me, I enjoy the atmosphere that the ultras and things like that they do bring. Obviously, there's a certain line, and I don't really want to go tap into that, but it's more about the passion that they have and the drive that they have for the sport to succeed. Another thing too, I want to talk about is just the difference in terms of options and opportunity. There's none in Australia. Like in terms of comparing it to other footballing countries, we've got 12 professional teams, so 12 coaches. Do you know what I mean? In terms of players, the rosters aren't as big as other countries, and on top of that, there's, like I said, there's only arguably 12 clubs, 200 plus professional players in a country. So there's the opportunity is very limited. And on top of that, you've got the physios, the sport conditioning, and so on, the analytics. So if you want to try and better the league, there needs to be a second division. There needs to be, and I've got another thing too is like particularly the bottom clubs in the A League, like if they're shit, there's no repercussions. There's nothing. They're shit. It's all right. And on top of that, the A League helps them in terms of actually propping them up financially as well. So, it's interesting too. I think there's a lot that kind of thing needs to change, because if it doesn't, and there's no pressure involved to try and improve and try to get better, then and the opportunity, then a lot of the time, young players. I know there's a couple of players at North Geelong that have gone overseas as well recently. Lucas Goko, he's signed a Prussian club, and Nicola as well, Vladovic, I think that's how you pronounce his name. They've gone on and they've signed as well in Croatia. So, and they're actually doing, I've seen a few highlights and whatnot, and they've been playing pretty regularly as well there. So, and they're doing well, and they've sort of bypassed the A League, So if they weren't able to get involved there, it's interesting.
The other thing with growing the game, right, and I spoke about it before, and investing in coaches at the national level and whatnot, but if I think back to 5-6 years ago, you have the likes of like a Del Piero coming here for a couple of years, and you've got obviously Diamanti now at West United and whatnot, but those bigger names like Del Piero and Harry Kewell when he came to Melbourne City, Melbourne Victory, for those, like at the end of the day, if you're not competitive with other nations' domestic leagues from a monetary perspective as well, you're going to lose it. You're going to lose audience interest. Like, how many times have we heard about a player choosing the MLS over the A League just because they could get paid more at the end? Like, do you know what I mean? And it's little things like that I think get overlooked in Australian football that really hurt it long term. I remember coming out of that golden era when the A League was really starting up, and they started investing in the A League, and those marquee salaries opened up, and we're able to get those players across. The casual fan turned into a fan that went every week, and I was one of them. I went to Melbourne Victory games almost every other week. What was the season when Frank Lowy fell off the stage and we won on the bottom? Yeah, that I promise you, I rarely missed a weekend that week, that year, and it was due to the fact that you were going there and you were watching quality football and quality players. Well, for me, the interest levels dropped off because there's no the lack of quality. I'm not going to say there's no quality players, there are, but the lack of quality out there and the lack of quality football that you see at that level is, it's hard to watch. It's just hard to watch.
Yeah, I fully agree with everything you two have said, and it's a shame considering where we were. It's like because we've gone on this massive decline. I think that's the worst part. Is like we had it, we had the formula, we had the players, we had everything there, and we've just kind of, whether it's through lack of development, lack of investment, people not caring, it's the downward spiral that football in this country has gone through, which I've been very vocal about on this podcast, is the most disappointing thing, and it's very frustrating.
Like Jules said, there's plenty of quality players out there that are playing at grassroots level, senior level in state leagues and the NPL, that if we got it right from an admin perspective, I think it could turn around very, very quickly. But the FFA have got to do something. They've got to do something quickly, because the drop off that we've seen, it's only going to keep continuing to a point where it's going to be almost unsalvageable at some point. If you've got a wave of momentum of kids wanting to play football in Australia, and it's becoming one of the biggest sports at grassroots level, especially if not the biggest at this point, why would you not want to invest and overinvest to secure a long-term and sustainable future for the game? It blows my mind. Blows my mind.
I think that's a perfect note to end it.